Morning. So, if anyone's wondering why I'm always doing these driving, it's just something I decided to do on my way to and or from work. It was the time that I had that was free, so I decided that would be the time that I'd make these videos. So, it's becoming a theme, which is, kind of like life, isn't it? Kind of fall into things, and the theme, driving in philosophy, driving down the rabbit hole with Jericho Brook. Anyway, this morning I dipped into a little bit of Ken Wilber. I like his work. He can be a controversial figure for some people, especially in the kind of postmodernist movement, because he does a lot of scathing critiques of postmodernism, which I won't get into here because it has nothing to do with what I'm directly trying to talk about, but it is kind of peripheral to it, so maybe I'll touch on it, but I don't really want to get into it all that much. I was reading about what he has to say about hierarchy, and how he links that to kind of like a holographic image of the universe. Hieros means sacred, and archy comes from rule, so it's sacred rule, hierarchy. And what's that all about? Especially as Americans and people who have pretenses towards, Democratic or Republican tendencies. I don't mean the political parties, but I mean the political organizations. A democratic society ruled by the people. Demos is people. Kratos is rule, I believe. I can't remember. It's Greek. But we have an aversion to concepts of hierarchy. What Wilber says about this, which I think is very cogent, is that hierarchy is really kind of the way that the world is structured. Nature is structured outside the human world. But it's not hierarchy in the ways that humans do it. So the problem he's saying is that it isn't hierarchy itself that is a problem, it's how humans tend to use hierarchies that is a problem. Dominator hierarchies intended to exploit those at levels below you, is a pathological form of hierarchy, but we've come to assume that is the only form of hierarchy, or it's actually the purpose of hierarchy. And what Wilber's saying is that isn't. And he gives an example, which really struck me. I thought it was really a good one. He uses language. And he says hierarchy is essentially holes within holes within holes within holes. It's like a bunch of nested Russian dolls. And so the example of language is, there's a letter, say the letter R. The letter R is a hole. It's a letter. It's a complete thing. At least it's a complete idea. That letter then exists within a word, and that word exists within a sentence, which exists within a paragraph, which exists perhaps within a chapter of a book, which exists within a book, which exists within a canon of literature written by an author, which exists within a culture, which exists within nature. So each of those levels are total and complete. Nature, culture, author, book, chapter, paragraph, sentence, word, letter. And that is a form of hierarchy. That's what Wilber's saying. He's using that as an example. Each one is embedded with the other, but each one is also whole and self-sufficient within its own level. The letter is a whole at its own level of organization, but apart at the level of word, and so on and so forth up the chain. And I think it's a great way of describing it. You could go back and you start talking about a bacterium or a cell, and then you go a cell inside of an organ, inside of an animal, inside of an environment, and inside of an entire ecosystem, and inside of a biome, inside of a planet, so forth and so on. He says, this is just the way that the world is structured. So it's very natural for us to have these types of organizations in our own societies and cultures, because this is kind of the way that the world is. Planets within solar systems, within galaxies, within universes, each one its own complete reality within its at its own level, yet it's also a part at a higher level. And this is also ties into, at least for me, Hegel, or the German idealists, and Hegel's work on the dialectic, where you have things that appear in contention at one level, manifest as a harmonious whole at another higher level. The synthesis. They come together, these opposites. So anyway, I have also learned, I enjoy Wilber. He's kind of a structuralist. He likes, organizing things, maybe to a fault, which is what his critics say. And I can understand that. I can understand their criticisms, because he is highly structured, and these are just, maybe arbitrary ways of structuring things, but they're useful ways of looking at things. And so the critiques of Wilber often include things like, these are constructed ideas. This doesn't actually reflect what's going on in reality. This is just the way that we see things. Where I get hung up is like, well, I do understand that, and of course our minds do not have a one-to-one correspondence with reality. It's not like we're seeing a picture of the world. We're having an experience of the world. We're interpreting the world. And so, of course, that's just inherent. I mean, we're just limited in what we can perceive and what we can think. And that's totally legit. I struggle with it at a certain point, because, you look at the natural hierarchies and you're like, well, you can organism, ecosystem, biome, planet, solar system, galaxy, so forth, so on. It's kind of compelling. Now, each of these things, this is where the postmodern stuff comes in. Each of these things are also a construction of our own minds. Our understanding of what a planet is, or a biome, or an organism, or a solar system, these are ideas that we have about what these things are. They're not the things themselves. So perhaps these ideas that we have about things are constructed in a way that reflects a structure of our own minds that makes it seem obvious that they're related in some kind of hierarchical fashion, when in fact they aren't, and that's a projection, right? Because the very concepts themselves are constructed by the mind, which is then organizing them. So perhaps it's a circular thing to say, hey, look, there are hierarchies, because perhaps that's just the way we think of all things, and that a hierarchy is embedded in the very concept of planet and solar system and whatever. So it's very difficult to get underneath this stuff. I think it's a valid critique of the structuralist approach in Wilber's work. I don't feel like it negates it, because if we go down that route,